Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave, Missouri coming off one of the biggest victories in school history, I think most people would agree, 36-27 over Oklahoma, which was ranked number one in the BCS standings. Let's just kind of take that day from the beginning. It was kind of, I think it's maybe one of the more memorable days that Missouri fans will have. Game day, I know you stopped by there. What was just your thoughts on that, the Missouri's reaction to that and how it all came off?
It was kind of a surreal thing to see Missouri be the center of the college football world for a few hours. And you just don't think of Missouri being in that place. But it really was just a great environment. The enthusiasm there was just unbelievable by not just students, but older alums that came by and wanted to check it out. Maybe people who aren't crazy about the whole game day TV show. But at least the atmosphere. For a while there, I was there with my family, and we were feeding my two boys on the steps of Jesse Hall, where we kind of had a great view of everything. And there were a couple older guys there, probably guys in their 50s, some alums, who were just sitting there and were almost just stunned by the whole scene and the atmosphere in front of them, because it was just something that you're just not used to seeing Missouri football associated with. And I think when you add that to the game, the atmosphere at Faurot Field, the win, and everything put together, I think it's like the best 24 hours Missouri football's ever experienced here, at least in this generation. So it was all around just pretty amazing environment, and things really went perfectly from even the weather. I mean, the forecast of terrible weather all weekend. It rained a little bit, but didn't spoil anything that happened for the Tigers and all their fans.
It was a good setting. It was a good choice to put it. It looked cool right there in front of the columns in Jesse Hall. It was like a lot of times they're right in front of a stadium and you can't see much behind them.
Right.
Good idea for whoever suggested that. It made sense. Then you talk about the atmosphere at the game, sellout crowd. It was probably for a home game, the only ones I guess I could compare it to recently would be the Nebraska games. But it was a late start, obviously. But then it seemed like the crowd was into it the whole game. Played a key role, I thought, in it.
Yeah, that opening kickoff return for a touchdown, that is as loud as I can remember that place being. Just almost deafening, and we were behind glass in the press box, but it was just quite an environment, and I think you give credit to the fans for showing up and sticking around. There wasn't a lot of red in the crowd either. It wasn't like some of those sellouts against Nebraska where a fifth of the crowd was Nebraska fans. It was just a lot of Missouri fans that showed up for that one.
Okay, then the game itself. Let's go over some of the things that maybe caught our eye, surprised us a little bit. Number one, Missouri winning, I think, caught our eye a little bit because it just hasn't happened much against Oklahoma. But maybe just go down the line. Some of the things that you thought Missouri did well or surprised you.
First of all, the Tigers controlled the line of scrimmage on both sides, and that has really been, I think, the defining difference between Missouri and Oklahoma for the last 6 matchups. That Oklahoma was better on the defensive line, they were better on the offensive line. And that was completely the opposite. Missouri got the running game going up front. They had huge holes along their offensive line. They got after Landry Jones, the Oklahoma quarterback, got some good pressure on him. Only 1 sack, but he was under pressure a lot. They didn't shut down Oklahoma's running game, but they held him to 99 yards. DeMarco Murray, one of the most versatile backs in the country, caught a bunch of passes, but I think he only ran for 49 yards. And as far as pass protection, that's a great pass rush that historically has just eaten alive Missouri's offensive line. I don't think Blaine Gabbert was touched one time. He certainly wasn't sacked, pressured once or twice, but he got rid of the ball and he just had great protection all night. So up front, it was the difference in that game, and it was the difference in this matchup going back to when Bob Stoops got there and started building this program.
Well, it's interesting. It seemed like Oklahoma went into this sort of assuming that four-man rush is going to get to Missouri. That's what they'd like to do, and they've been successful at it. Right. They don't have to blitz, basically. But when it became obvious that it wasn't working, he's got all day out there to throw those deep passes down the middle. It never really seemed like they had a plan B. I mean, it seemed like, oh, well, that didn't work. Now we're going to continue to give up 20-yard.
Right. And with just rushing 4, you have 7 in coverage. You figure you can cover things pretty well. And they still had guys open downfield, and when they weren't completely open, Gabbert did a great job of delivering the ball there. And I thought one of his best games he's played at Missouri.
He looked really good. Offensive line, like you said, I thought that was by far their best game. There were times early in the year where even when teams were like Illinois were rushing 3 and guys were slipping through, and it was making kind of wonder maybe this line isn't as good as it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
They were dynamite.
They seemed to pick everything up. There was a few times where they made it an unbalanced line. They brought Jack Miners in to play basically almost like a tight end. They had 6 linemen out there, shut down the splits a little bit to get the running game going. And I think David Yost was pretty innovative in this one and doing a lot of different things to get that running game going. Did some misdirection that seemed to get Oklahoma running one way and Missouri ran the ball the other way. So a big credit for the coaches. They really seemed like they were prepared for this and, were on top of Oklahoma the entire game.
For most of the year, we've seen them, when they do run the ball, they're putting the running back in motion from the slot, and he's running forever and taking the handoff going sideways. This time they did incorporate a play where the guy's going forward. I think it's just a zone read play, but it's more of a north-south thing, and that really was effective. I mean, they were gashing him for 20 yards sometimes with Josie and
right.
Devin Moore too. I thought that was a really effective play and one that kind of a lot of people have been clamoring for, and we see why now.
Those are the type of plays that a lot of teams don't even try against Oklahoma historically because they're so good up the middle with their defensive line, and they don't exactly have any bums on their line now. They've got some very good players, but Missouri definitely won those matchups up front and creating big holes for guys like Devin Moore, like you mentioned. He had that 39-yard run. A lot of that he did on his own, carrying some guys with him, but big holes for those guys all day long.
Missouri obviously got a great start, which I think it's helpful in a game like that against a team that you've kind of had a little bit of a monkey on your back. But then I thought the fourth quarter obviously was the difference in the game where Missouri really dominated the fourth quarter. They go into the fourth quarter losing by a point. They looked really good. Interesting decisions by Stoops too. I thought usually you cut the lead if you're down by 15 or if you're going to be down by 15 points. You would put off going for 2 to extend it to as long as you can. He goes for 2, misses, so now it's a 9-point deficit.
Right.
That one didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Nor did when he decided to punt there,
right.
Backed up on their own goal line, sort of just waving the white flag at that point. I think you made the point at the time that he just doesn't want to give up another score and make this look more lopsided than it is. And I think that was probably the case on that one because I bet Missouri would have scored again if they would have gotten a stop there and really added to that lead.
Also, like you mentioned, David Yost, I thought some pretty gutsy calls. He runs the first trick play either one of us can remember this year down near the goal line, almost gets a touchdown out of it. And then you really need kind of a touchdown to put the game away. He inserts James Franklin, lets him carry the ball. I mean, that's something that, I think a more conservative guy would have said, we're not going to put a freshman in here right now who's been cold all game to come in here and try to put this away.
He just barely got in, too. It looked like somebody missed a block up front, but he got in, and it was, like you said, a gutsy call.
All right. Well, the BCS standings now would indicate Missouri is a national title contender. They're one of 7 undefeated teams left in the nation, the only one in the Big 12, 6th in the BCS standings. Do you think they are a legitimate national title contender?
As long as they keep winning and others keep losing. I mean, they really are. Are they one of the 7, 8 best teams in the country? I'm not sure if they are, and I don't know if, how do you really answer that? I think they're a very complete team. I think they're good offensively. They have been the last couple of weeks against good competition. They're very good defensively, and they play really good special teams. So, they've passed all their tests so far, and that's really all you can do is play the games that are put in front of you. If they win at Nebraska this week, which I think they have a good chance of doing, then I think it's really safe to say that this is one of the best, most complete teams in the country, and they're going to still be up there for a while as a real, legit national title contender. But you got to win this one, obviously.
On game day on Saturday, they had a list of the 10 unbeaten teams, and they said they ran the computer models of the odds of any of them finishing the regular season undefeated. Boise State was like a 90-some% chance. Missouri was last with 1.6% chance.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would be if they did it today, but to me, obviously, I think rightfully so, Nebraska's going to be favored by a little bit this game. But I think beyond that, I think Missouri is probably a favorite for the remaining 4 games on the schedule.
Oh, absolutely. And it would take an upset for Missouri to lose one of those games. And no guarantees, obviously, but this is the heart of the schedule, this defining stretch. I think I said on here a few weeks ago, if they go 2-2, that's really good. Well, they're 2-0 already. But that just kind of raises the stakes a little bit more. Now you almost expect them not to win necessarily this week, but to really be competitive and have a chance to go 3-0 and then maybe even 4-0 through this stretch.
Yeah, I think the big key is can they continue to run the ball? If that's not an aberration, if they can really run the ball like that, then, yeah, they can beat anybody.
Sure.
If they go back to where they're running for 60 yards a game and having to throw the ball 70 times or whatever it is, then they're not. They're a top 20 team.
Right.
All right, Nebraska game coming up. This is annually the week where our website pretty much goes down with all the extra traffic from not only from Missouri fans but from Nebraska fans.
Sure.
This will be the last time they play as part of this wrap. There's so many subplots to this game. It's going to be fascinating. Just first of all, your thoughts on the end of this rivalry. In the last since about maybe 2003, it's kind of developed into Missouri's second biggest opponent.
Sure. And I think it's probably the one that's more competitive, gets people a little more riled up because it's a more nationally relevant game, or has been, except for that 2007 Kansas game. I think it's a shame that this is the last one because, like you said, the last 7 years, this has really become a great rivalry on and off the field, a lot of subplots all the time. There seems to be a general disliking from one fan base to the other. The whole Big Ten story over the summer, I think, really fueled that even more so. So it's appropriate that it ends with a game with so many stakes, so much on the line for these two programs. And in Missouri, in the rare situation of being not the favorite, obviously, for this matchup, but being the higher-ranked team, it seems like almost, I don't know if you say has more to lose, but at this point, Nebraska needs a lot of help to get back into any kind of national title conversation. Missouri just needs to keep winning. So you've got that subplot too, and obviously all the stuff with Blaine Gabbert and his history with Nebraska as well.
Nebraska, I guess, going into this year, they didn't announce who their starting quarterback was until like 5 minutes before the first game. That really changed the dynamic of that team, obviously. Now they're a team that's much more explosive than they have been in the past. Just how do you think Missouri matches up with a quarterback that mobile?
I think they match up pretty well. I mean, you think, what do you need to have against a mobile quarterback who runs the option like that? You need a smart defense, a disciplined defense that plays good assignment football, that knows where they're supposed to be and they're in the right place at the right time, doesn't give up big plays, and tackles well. Well, I think I just kind of defined Missouri's defense. That's how they've played all year long. So I think that suits them well. They've got good, tough, smart linebackers who, for this week, they probably won't have Luke Lambert, but the three that were on the field last week, that's a good bunch. They lose Dominique Hamilton for the season, a very good nose tackle for them, but they get Alden Smith back, and you assume he's a little bit more healthy this week than he was last week. So I think this is Missouri's defense matches up well. I really do. Oklahoma State gave up a bunch of passing yards to Nebraska last week. I don't think Missouri's defense will do that, and they're better in the secondary, and they'll get better pressure up front too. So it's a really good matchup. He's great. He's put up some big yards this year, but Texas found a way to shut him down, and Texas hasn't exactly been a great defense against some other opponents this year. So there is a way to slow down this Nebraska running game.
Missouri hasn't given up many big plays this year. Really, the only two that come to mind is the San Diego State game. They give up 2, and then they give up a long screen pass to Texas A&M, but not many. And that's kind of the way Nebraska's been scoring in the games where they've been scoring big, as he breaks free for 60 and 70-yard runs.
Right, and not that there's any comparison here, but Illinois, they ran a lot of the option stuff with the zone read with Shieldhass, and he got a bunch of yards in the first half. Missouri made some adjustments in the second half, and much different caliber of competition. But Missouri shut that down completely in the second half back in week 1. So they've seen this style at least before. They saw some of it against Nevada last year. So they won't be surprised by this, even though during the offseason I can't imagine they were really doing their offseason preparation for Taylor Martinez and the zone read, because they just hadn't seen it yet. No one knew who was going to be their quarterback.
And lastly, I guess, emotion was really Missouri's friend this week. A lot of times you think it's going to be hard after a big victory to come back and play well the next week. I guess maybe the closest comparison we can make is in 2007. They beat Kansas in the game that everybody was looking at. Then they have to come right back the next week and play Oklahoma, and just your thoughts on their ability maybe to bounce back from an emotional win and still play well the next week.
This team, I think, can handle it, because this team, the last few years, and in their one real true road game this year, they play pretty well on the road. They seem to kind of feed off of that challenge, and Blaine Gabbert especially. I'm not going to say he's robotic, but he isn't like Chase Daniel to where you kind of get worried about him getting too keyed up, too caught up in the moment, where I think he did sometimes during his career. Gabbert he just seems to stay very even keel, but even in that A&M game, players talked about how fired up he was on the sideline and was locked in was how they were describing him. So I think if they kind of feed off of that mentality, this is a team that takes things pretty seriously, has a very business-like approach. I don't know if they will let down in that regard. Maybe if this were a lesser opponent, I could see them stumbling a little bit, but I can't imagine they were able to celebrate too much about the Oklahoma win, knowing what they have in front of them and how big the stakes are now against Nebraska.
All right, well, that's it for this week. Tune in next week. We will discuss that Nebraska game and see if Missouri is still being mentioned as a national title contender.